Hey guys, welcome back to the Driveline channel. Today is exciting because we're out here in the mountains. We're out here in this beautiful 993 911, and I'm here to talk about peak machines, this 911. And this car was heralded in its day at the top of its game. It was an engineering icon. It was an enthusiast dream car. The press and journalists heralded it as being just the absolute best sports car that you could have. And even today, the prices that this car commands still says that that's true. But after real ownership, do they still live up to that living legend? Or is it just peak hype? The iconic 993. It's often called the last true 911. This Porsche 993 sits at the intersection of tradition and modernity. I like to think of this Porsche 993 as being the resto mod from the factory. I mean, if you really think about it, you know, it's the bridge between vintage 911 charm and modern performance. This is essentially a factory resto mod car. Now, unless you think that the 964 is that car, which maybe it's closer to being like that, I think the 993 is the best reflection of what it would be to have peak 911, if we're talking about air-cooled. The thing that's really interesting, you know, even talking about the 993 is that, you know, if you know anything about Porsche's history, the last air-cooled engine to be built just so happened at the same time that Ferry Porsche died. Isn't that interesting? On March 27th, 1998, the last air-cooled engine for the 993 built in Stuttgart rolled off the line at the same time that Mr. Ferry Porsche passed away. Now that's 35 years of Porsche 911 to you and I. And I think that signals the drastic change in what would become of the 911 and Porsche as a whole. If you know anything about the history about when the 993 was being developed, Porsche was on the verge of bankruptcy. The 964 was definitely not a hit car. In fact, it was talked pretty badly about. But today it's heralded as being even worth more than the 993, which is absolute bonkers. Because if you were growing up, you remember the 964 being kind of the trash can Porsche, if you will. And I grew up around these cars. I mean, people didn't care for the 964. They loved their G-bodies, and when the 993 came out, it was the most beautiful 911, and it was the most modern 911, and it was the coolest 911. I remember getting a ride, I think when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and a black 993 turbo, and that was just the coolest car ever. So even to get a taste of it with this base 993, I'm kind of living that dream car and that childlike dream as well. Now back to what I was talking about, that 35 years of 911 to you and I, signaling such a drastic change in Porsche. I think this is what adds to the provenance and hype that surrounds these air-cooled cars. Now, why do these cars hold such a legendary status, and is it really justified to be called a peak machine? All right, so we're gonna talk about this first segment about the legacy of air-cooled Porsches. First and foremost, the 993 is heralded as being the last hurrah of the 911. I mean, it's the last of its kind. It's the last of the air-cooled Porsche 911. Production started from 1994 in Europe. 1995 is when they were imported into America. And like I said, the last car rolled off in 1998. I think it would be kind of interesting to actually talk about how does that work? Well, if we're gonna talk about the engine, let's go ahead and open her up. Never get tired of that door sound. Now, when people talk about 911s and they talk about air-cooled engines, I think it's slightly half of the story. What they're actually talking about is an air and oil cooled engine. So how does that work? Well, of course, there's no coolant in the car. There's no radiator. There's an oil cooler, but there's no radiator, no water, no coolant, anything like that. Instead of this, the 993 and most air-cooled 911s use a fan, and a cooling fan that is driven by a belt from the crankshaft. Now, what happens here is that big engine-driven fan actually takes the ambient air and forces that air over the cooling fins that are built onto the cylinder heads and the engine itself. Now, these fins help to increase the surface area so that they can carry some of that heat away directly from the engine. Now, where the real magic happens is with the oil. If you ever changed oil on a 911, and oh man, it's a lot of oil in this car. I think it's somewhere around, like, I don't know, 12 to 14 quarts or something like that, and it's a dry sumped engine. So that's more than typically double of what a modern car would usually take. I think my F-150 takes about 7 or 8 quarts. So, I mean, it is a lot of oil that runs through this car, but it is truly the lifeblood for this engine. Now, when that oil circulates through the engine, it picks up the heat and then it flows through those large external oil coolers that the 911 has. And through those oil coolers that are hidden in the front bumper or in the fenders, those coolers work like a radiator, just with oil instead. So really what we have is a two-part system. And what do I mean by that? Air cools the engine directly and the oil cools from the inside out. Does that make sense? And that's what gives the 911 its distinctive mechanical soundtrack. I mean, that's what the whirring noise that you hear from the fan, that's what you hear, just some of those internal components going off, and you know, there's no insulation or water jackets that are hiding the noise of the engine, but you're hearing much more with an air-cooled engine. I like to think of it almost like an aircraft engine. I mean, they're pretty similar from what I understand. So it's old school, it's loud, it's part of the reason why air-cooled cars and Porsches in general are so much an experience, because it feels so raw and so alive. But specifically with this 993 sitting over the rear axle, and it really is actually sitting over the rear axle, and you can definitely feel it in the corners, is this 3.6 liter flat six engine. Now, this engine is not very powerful. It only produces about 280 some odd horsepower and 250 foot-pounds of torque. And this is a 1997 car with OBD2, and it has the Vari-Ram intake, which helps to open up and make longer runners and shorter runners just to help the power out. I would say that the difference between like the 94 and 95 cars is that this car has substantially more torque on the bottom end, but it feels more out of breath at the top end. If this car doesn't feel like it has much above 6,500 RPM, give or take, you know. It starts to feel like it's running out of breath. But anyways, now people would tell you, and Porsche's people specifically would tell you, that it's not just a minor technical detail over this car being air-cooled. They would say that this defines the soul of the car, that air-cooled engines are like the peanut butter to your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You can't have a 911 without it. Now, we all know that that's not true. I mean, the 911 is still existing, and the new GT3 is absolutely bonkers. But if we're talking about iconic cars, the air-cooled engine has a distinct mechanical sound and feel that is unlike and uncharacteristic of a water-cooled engine. Even though the basic block between the 996 and even this 993 are pretty similar, there's such a difference in sound and feel and characteristic that Porsche people just go crazy over. Now for me, I'm not really too fond of the air-cooled Porsche engine. I don't think it's that spectacular. It doesn't rev super high. It's not the most powerful engine. The sound that it produces is okay. It's not fantastic. Even though this car is equipped with Pfister Stage 2 mufflers, I mean, I just don't think it's personally that emotive. It's a great engine. It does sound good. It's very mechanical. It makes so many cool noises. I think the G-body engine is more characteristic of air-cooled engines because the whirring sound is much more distinctive and much more cooler. But, you know, there's something that water-cooled engines just won't capture, even with this 993 as well, too. Now, no water-cooled engine is gonna make the same amount of noise that even the 993 does. And even after switching to the water-cooled engine, starting with the 996 generation, that fundamental shift was not only with the engineering, but it was with the heart and soul of the 911. And enthusiasts thought that the 911 would move in a direction that most diehard people would think was not it, right? They didn't appreciate the odd styling, the fried egg headlights. I mean, I didn't. But I mean, I still thought the 996 Turbo was a really cool car, and even the 4S, I mean, who doesn't like that car? But those hardcore enthusiasts saw more nannies and a more comfortable driving experience and a more muted driving experience as a bad thing. They were essentially, Porsche themselves, making the 911 a better car, but it was at the cost of tradition. What that means to me, I mean, I could honestly, I could care less about the history of the 911. I think it has a very cool history, but to me, if it's not a good car, it's not a good car. I mean, we're not heralding the Beetle as being, you know, that kind of driving experience, because it's not. I mean, if you want an air-cooled engine, just go drive a Beetle, right? But I mean, I'll leave that to you, whether or not you think that that legend of the air-cooled engine lives up to the hype that surrounds it. If the 996 looked the way that the 993 does, and you essentially have a 997, do you think people would have recepted the car much better? I think they would have, because look at the way the 997 was received. I love that car. I love the way that it looks. I think that is probably the best looking 911, and I think it is the best example of 911 as well too. But I digress. Hey guys, thank you so much for making it this far into the video. Stay tuned for part 2, where I go over the build quality of the 993.